Before getting started, I want to draw attention to today's video sponsor. YouTube makes it honestly really difficult to monetize a channel nowadays. They literally purged like 25,000 channels not too long ago or something like that for newly created TOS violations. Not to mention demonetization issues, which saw multiple commentary channels completely nuked. Basically, sponsors are becoming an integral part of the routine now, and I want to thank Black Desert Online for working with me. Black Desert is a very well-known game, and in a world that is honestly oversaturated with MMOs, Black Desert stands out nicely in a few different areas. The character creation is at or near the top of the entire industry. The graphics are competitive with or superior to almost any other title you will see in the entire space, and certainly above most other MMOs. The emphasis on real-time action combat takes a step back from standard tab targeting, which has become common over recent years, and the combined effect of all of this is a well-rounded game with a lot to offer. The scope of this MMO is absolutely enormous. There are economy features, skilling, crafting, open world large-scale PvP, and a whole bunch more that will take an incredible amount of time to fully explore or completely exhaust. There is also a new feature called Season Servers, which are a temporary realm in which experience gain is increased to allow for faster character growth, and upon completion they give graduation rewards. The game receives cyclical updates, both large and small, has a very large open world, and truth be told, it is a title that sits very high on my list of best ever MMO experiences I personally had over these past years. Bottom line, with a one-time payment principle, meaning you buy the game and then all the content and all the updates from there forward are yours to play with no additional charges, I'm happy to have Black Desert Online sponsor the channel and help provide income stability to this video. I hope everyone can understand that. You can use the link down below to download the game. New players get 7 days for free, and returning players get a welcome gift in their account. Thank you again for their support of this channel. Again, use the link down below to support. Alright, it's time to talk about BAFTA, also known as the British Academy Film and Television Awards, because BAFTA has apparently decided to just drop kick their common sense out the window and implement, or look towards implementing at least, stringent award criteria that in some cases probably aren't possible, and in others are flat out discriminatory to artistic projects for no reason whatsoever that relates to the game itself or its creative value, and are purely based on hiring practices, employee composition, or character identity. This is a document embedded within the actual BAFTA.org site and appears to refer to 2021. I don't actually know how to reach this document through the outward-facing website interface. I couldn't seem to find a link, but the direct link does function, which was sent to me by someone on Twitter, and I'll have that posted down below in the description. What this appears to be, and I really do hope I'm wrong, is the eligibility for video game awards drafted by BAFTA intended for 2021, and the standards here are just unbelievable. They aren't unbelievable because I have some fundamental rejection of diversity as a concept. They are unbelievable because almost none of them relate at all to the actual game receiving the award. And if they do, they basically say you must make your characters like this. You must have this wild statistical composition of marginalized groups and have your game preach activist themes, or you won't be allowed to participate in any award categories. This thing is honestly just a monstrosity. Even if you can somehow mentally contort yourself to understand where they're coming from, which might be doable, after really reading through this, it just becomes absolutely impossible to understand how any of this will function. It is made abundantly clear that certain games, regardless of quality, just can't ever get awards, period, just because of the setting or subject matter. And the endeavor to increase diversity and representation has become a sledgehammer that is being thrown around haphazardly for literally no reason. Now, I understand, obviously, that the BAFTA Awards are not some pinnacle of achievement in the industry, and it's really not imperative that games ever seek their approval, but when this is the type of direction that they have chosen, it's hard to imagine it as an isolated mentality. It's not an isolated mentality, we already know that for a fact, but more than almost any other singular instance, these criteria and requirements make it obvious that fairness, equality, meritocracy, and actual creative vision are legitimately under siege. Some of you probably won't believe me, so let's just get started reading. Standard A, in-game representation, themes, and narratives. Detail how the video game will address underrepresentation in the lead and secondary characters, playable character rosters, casting choices, the main and secondary storylines, themes, and narratives, and where the game is set. Identify where there are unfamiliar characters or themes and narratives that are not frequently portrayed in games or are shown from a new perspective. Describe where there are complex and non-stereotypical representations of characters or cultures who are normally relegated to two-dimensional roles. Detail the perspective of the narrative or theme of the game and how this affects the way in which characters or cultures are portrayed. To achieve standard A, you will need to meet 3 of the criteria below, and this is where it just completely goes off the rails. The requirements are things like 50-50 male to female character breakdown, which is in terms of either main characters or secondary characters, 10% LGBTQ, 7% deaf or disabled characters, and you don't need to have all of these things simultaneously, but you must choose between them and conform to a certain number. It goes so far as describing a necessity for economic diversity in the characters to ensure that there is representation from a lower socioeconomic background. So I guess all royalty, a game about like noble politics? No, put the peasants in. It also goes on to state that developers should explain where there are characters that are not frequently portrayed on screen and or how the game is offering non-stereotypical representation. Serfs and peasants in medieval times, at least, for example, are not a construct that has a whole lot of non-stereotypical approaches, while keeping them accurate. The idea that you must diversify into a spread of character identities and then that you need to be clear and aggressive about transforming them away from any stereotypes will begin to create a gauntlet of qualification even under the best of circumstances. Again, you need to choose from these options, but the other ones are even worse. Main storyline/subject matter. The main storylines, themes, or narrative of the video game is about underrepresented groups. The game should demonstrate diversity across the majority of the playtime in order to meet A3, not just a single section or element. Another option has to do with setting, and this one really blew my mind. The setting is wholly or partially in an underrepresented region or community. If the game takes place in an imagined or fantastical setting, please detail how this relates to real-world underrepresented regions or communities. You should explain where there are settings/communities that are not frequently portrayed on screen and or how the game is offering non-stereotypical representation. Again, so a fantasy game that is required to pull you out of the fantasy actively and say, well, hold on now, hold on, champ. Don't you know that elves and dwarves are actually meant to display these two marginalized groups? And the significance here is that the world oppresses them. Slow down with your escapism, get a handle on that fun. This is about educating you to the socioeconomic status of underprivileged groups. This isn't a fantasy realm or a fantasy game, you bigot. I'm genuinely baffled here. I'm not going to read every single thing here, even though it's all equally as absurd, but keep in mind you don't have to do all of these things at the same time to be eligible, but you do have to meet 3 of these categories to satisfy A1, and that's just the first standard. Standard B, Creative Leadership and Development Team. This is where we go from your story must have these characters and themes to your development team has to be composed like so. For Standard B, you need 2 of these criteria, and 3 out of 4 of them are the 50-50 male-female, 20% underrepresented groups, LGBTQ, deaf, disabled, etc. metrics. The last category is somewhat achievable in a realistic way because it's about corporate internal policy, so that's kind of heavy-handed, I guess, but it's at least within the realm of reason. However, the rest of them, it's lunacy. Enforcing equal stat distributions purely for the sake of it is not even always possible. Never mind the fact that if you have 20 men and 20 women and then 10 men quit, but 15 women and only 5 men reapply, you simply can't maintain a 50-50 percentage split. So you what? Can't get the award because of that? Or you are forced to hire a bunch of women or a bunch of men and only men or women to adhere to it, otherwise you are disqualified? Setting that aside, some professions have an incredibly skewed demographic breakdown on top of all this. Key findings by the Williams Institute, and this applies to the United States right now, but I'll loosely extrapolate that the difference won't be all that drastic across the globe, show that roughly 3.5% of the population identifies as LGBTQ. However, the BAFTA requirements state that a 10% ratio is needed. You might not even see 10% of applicants with that criteria, let alone have them actually be the best competitive choice in terms of job experience, work ethic, you name it. The ratio of male to female in game design is at or around-ish 71 to 24 and 5% transgendered. Some of the possible requirements, however, is that there be a 50-50 split, which means in a reasonable scenario where you have, let's say, 100 open spots and 1,000 men apply but only 300 women, you must reject 950 of those men, regardless of talent, qualifications, or experience, while only rejecting 250 women. But the relative pool of talent to choose from has been artificially confined. It may be that 25 of those women deserve to be there, but the rest simply don't have the skill set. Or it might be that only 10 of those men deserve to be there. You should have hired 90% women because they were just more talented and it was the best, team composition. But you have to break it down this way if you want a shot at an award. It might be that you literally cannot meet these requirements. You have 20 jobs open, 48 men apply, and 6 women, and all but, I don't know, 3 of them are white. That's it. You can't meet the disabled requirement, you can't meet the LGBTQ requirement, you can't meet the gender requirement or the ethnicity one either, so you cannot meet standard B. Moving on, it goes into various other employment standards, like you have to promote certain groups to higher positions within the company. I'm not kidding, that's literally what it says. You have to create certain mentorships for specific groups, stuff like that. And 2 of these ridiculous criteria must be met to adhere to the standard. Lastly is standard D, which literally says stuff like, the game's core teams support and engage meaningfully with local and online grassroots organizations. I'm not even kidding. It's not enough that your game is activist material to get an award. You have to go out and engage with grassroots local and online organizations. To get this award, you have to become an activist for our causes. There's more. You can read the whole thing if you want, but it's absolutely absurd. Picture this. You quite literally cannot make a historically accurate combat-oriented game about feudal Europe and get an award. You must modify history within that digital world to qualify, because you'll need to either manipulate character identity, ethnicity, origin, stereotypes, or any number of things, because feudal Europe simply did not contain combat troops in a percentage high enough to satisfy these standards. I get it. BAFTA is not the end-all be-all of video game moderation, not even close, but the absurdity here is legendary. This is untenable, not to mention wildly outside the realm of even raw statistical realities, and if these truly are their standards in 2021, that is going to absolutely brutalize the prospects for their award ceremony to actually award recognition to the legitimate best creative teams and best creative products, with the most well-crafted creative vision. It's also possible that a high-quality game gets made that just organically meets all of these standards. That is 100% on the table. It is possible. But turning them into flat-out categorical requirements, that is just overboard. And I don't see how any intellectually functional person can draft something like this and think, yeah, that will ensure we get the best possible artistic works. Ship it. Stamp it. Seal of approval. It's wild, man. But that's it. If you want to support, there are links down below: merch, Patreon, Twitter, other social media, as well as another gaming YouTuber to support as well. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.